998, 999, 1,000.
It's the deep burn. I can barely lift my legs because I did so many. I don't know if you guys heard me counting, but I did over 1,000. Guys, this awesome new hack squat attachment from RitFit Sports attaches right onto your power rack, and it is going to take your leg gains to the next level. I'm talking brutal, high rep hack squats right from the comfort of your own home gym. And then when you're done with your work for the day, it just folds right down onto the side of the rack, and you can forget that it's even there. Minimal footprint, reasonable price, and massive gains. Let's review this sucker. What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and today I want to review this awesome new hack squat attachment by RitFit Sports. So this crafty little thing is designed to attach to 2x2 power racks, and the cool thing about this attachment is that you can get the feel of leg machine work without the need for actually occupying precious home gym space with a bulky leg machine. So it just clips onto the side of the power rack through the safety pin holes, and then you get this sort of arcing hack squat exercise with it that has a feel that's really similar to a reverse hack squat done on a traditional hack squat machine, or even one that kind of feels like those fancy pendulum squat machines. So this attachment is pretty creative and really freaking cool, and today I just kind of want to go over the different features of it, what all types of different exercises you can do with it, how the work actually feels on it, and what my overall impression of it is. So let's jump right into it. And hey, if you find this review helpful, or you just like my content and you want to support my work, please remember to smash the like button before you go. Feel free to share the video and leave me a friendly comment down below for our old friend, Mr. Algorithm. Now, the attachment is pretty straightforward to set up and use. It takes probably 20 or 30 minutes to unbox everything and get it all assembled. I think there were somewhere between 8 and 12 bolts that needed to be secured to put everything together, if I'm remembering correctly. And then once it's all set up, it just latches onto the side of your power rack via these safety pin holes. So that means you can adjust the height of the apparatus up or down depending on your preferences, although I do have a word of caution regarding how high that you choose to set the attachment on your power rack, and I want to touch on that a little bit later in the video. But then once you have the attachment secured to your power rack, there are 7 different height adjustment points that you can set it at depending on what you want the resting height of the implement to be. And those adjustment points also serve the dual purpose of acting as a safety so that you can create a bottom out point for the attachment while you're busting your butt under some heavy freaking weights. And a pretty cool feature with this attachment is that it really has a pretty minimal overall footprint, as you can just leave it folded down when you're not using it. And when it's like that, it really doesn't take up very much space at all. When it's standing up, it actually protrudes out pretty far from the rack. So initially, I thought I was going to have to take it on and off whenever I wanted to use it. But since it folds down into that space-saving fashion, that's not necessary. And that's a very welcome addition, because now you're getting the benefits of big, bulky leg machines without occupying really any space at all in your home gym. Now, in terms of what exercises you can actually do on this attachment, obviously it's really designed for things like hack squats primarily, and then calf raises secondarily, but I have actually gotten pretty creative with it. So I've done hack squats, obviously, but I've also done jump squats, loaded jumps. I've done little ankle hop type loaded jumps as well. I've done strict overhead presses, push presses, and even chest presses as well. And I'm sure there are more movements that you could think of and potentially do with an attachment like this, but that's all I've been able to think of so far. I've only had it for a few weeks now. And I will say that most of that work that I've done so far has actually felt really, really good on this attachment. Obviously, it's best designed for the hack squat pattern. And once you get it set up correctly, it does take a little bit of trial and error, but once you get it set up correctly for your height and you figure out how to set your body up correctly around the attachment, it works really, really well for this. Like I alluded to earlier in the video, it kind of feels more like a reverse hack squat to me, or even a pendulum squat machine, than it does a traditional hack squat machine. And that is probably because the hips are able to move freely through space rather than being pinned against a back pad like they are with a traditional hack squat. And personally, I vastly prefer those types of movements, a pendulum type squat, the reverse hack squat, compared to a traditional hack squat, because I think that they feel much more natural than those true hack squat machines tend to feel. Honestly, doing loaded jumps with this attachment has also worked out pretty well. I'm able to get into a good rhythm here and get some really nice explosive action through my legs. And over time, I've been really jealous of those machines that I've seen pro athletes use, where it's sort of like a pendulum squat machine, but they're performing an explosive leg press off of it, and that explosive press propels their body sort of backwards and horizontally, basically just with the idea of getting in some really aggressive, explosive leg work. And I think that the training effect that I'm getting here doing these loaded jumps on this attachment is actually probably pretty similar to that. It's obviously a little bit unorthodox, but I think it has a lot of value and it feels really good. And then that loaded ankle hop that I'm doing here is just another take on that exact same type of movement. Instead of using a lot of leg here, I am emphasizing and sort of isolating the Achilles tendons and just focusing on bouncing off of the Achilles as if I'm kind of on a trampoline. It's more of a rebound type movement, a plyometric type movement, an elastic and reactive type movement, as compared to a more power-based one like I showed first, where you're getting more legs involved into the jump. And I've also really enjoyed doing overhead pressing work on this attachment. So the most natural choice here is to just do a regular old strict overhead press, no leg drive, just pressing using the power of your shoulders and your triceps. And what you end up getting is something similar to the feel of a machine overhead press, as this attachment is a mostly stable implement for you to press off of. You can do those strict overhead presses standing, you can do them kneeling, you can do them seated, really whatever your preference is. In some ways, it actually kind of feels a little bit like a landmine press, because the pressing angle is angled forward slightly, but there's no potential for lateral deviation like there is with a landmine, so it's even a little bit more stable than that. The shoulder pads naturally encourage you to perform all the reps from a dead stop at the bottom, which is also probably a good thing. Now, taking the overhead press concept even a little bit further, though, we can also start to incorporate some leg drive. So now we're starting to look at something that's more resembling a push press type pattern on this implement. A push press is one of my favorite all-time exercises, or even something similar to what would be called a Viking press, like what you see in strongman style training and competition. Obviously, there are some differences, because I'm pretty sure that in a true Viking press, you're supposed to be facing away from the implement, and with this attachment you kind of have to face towards the implement to be able to reach the handles properly. But either way, that explosive push press style overhead work with leg drive feels really sharp and productive with this attachment, and it lets you get in some really nice work this way. And lastly, I've also used this attachment essentially as a chest press machine. Now, I did this exercise in two ways. The first way was top down, the way you would usually do it. And this was a little bit dangerous to do by myself, because in order to set everything up and actually be able to lower the implement and execute a chest press, I had to have it set at a certain height and then get under it, release one of my hands, and take the safety pin out to then be able to lower the implement down and do the movement. So when I did it that way, I kept it light, because having one hand only supporting the implement was a little bit of a risk of it slipping or me dropping it or whatever. But if you have a partner with you to take the pin in and out for you, this would actually be a really good way to use this attachment. You could get in some really solid work that way. Now, the second way that I did it was bottom up, where the safety pin was already set at the deepest point of the press, and then I just kind of wiggled my way under it and pressed it up. So obviously doing it that way, there's no danger there, but it was quite cumbersome for me to get in and out from underneath of the weight, because obviously at that point I'm using the attachment for something that it's not designed for at all. However, I do have to say that in spite of using the attachment for something that's basically completely out of pocket, these chest presses actually felt really freaking amazing. They're super smooth, and honestly, once I got the setup right and was under the weight, I really couldn't tell the difference between this attachment and an actual chest press machine. Obviously, the cumbersomeness of the setup is a little bit of a deterrent here, but still, it was never designed for anything like this in the first place. So being able to rig this up and basically get a chest press machine out of it too, and it's just a nice little bonus feature. I felt like I should mention it. The presses feel great as a sort of a pump finisher, and the work is very productive. All right, so now that we have covered all of the features that this attachment has to offer, as well as all the different types of exercises you can potentially do on it, and the quality and feel of those movements, I do just want to touch on something to be cautious about when using an attachment like this, and that is the potential tip risk. And if you don't have your power rack bolted down to the floor, this is something that you're going to have to be cognizant of when using this attachment, or really any other similar type of power rack attachment. So the attachment has a max load capacity of 350 pounds, which is pretty good, right? If you really want to work your legs hard and heavy on this thing, then you can. And obviously most of the stuff that it's designed for, hack squats and whatnot, are really better served done in high rep ranges anyway, so you don't need to have a 500 or 600 pound capacity. But what I discovered is once you kind of get into the mid to high 200s, you do have to start to take some precautions to ensure that the far side of your machine, of your power rack, is not at risk of lifting off the ground and potentially tipping over, right? In order to eliminate this risk, obviously the best thing to do would be to simply bolt the power rack down to the floor. But that is not an option for everybody. Personally, I don't want to bolt my racks to the floor because I like to move them around sometimes. So the next best thing is going to be counter-loading the rack with a lot of weight, right? So if you've got 200 or 300 pounds loaded onto the attachment here, you're probably going to want to put at least a few hundred extra pounds on the opposite side of your rack as a counterbalance, just to be safe and greatly mitigate any tipping risk that might exist. Now, another thing you can do is set the attachment up a little bit lower down on the power rack. Initially, I set it up right about at shoulder height. That was just kind of my first inclination for where I should put the thing. So that's roughly 4.5 feet off the floor. That way I could easily get underneath the implement, unrack it, and start squatting. But this is the height where I ran into those issues, where I noticed that there was a potential for the opposite side of the rack to come off of the floor, because it actually happened to me right at the end of my top set, the very first time that I used the implement. So then, taking what I learned, the next time I used the attachment for hack squats specifically, I simply lowered it down. I attached it to the rack about a foot closer to the ground. Now, this makes it a little bit harder for you to get under the implement and unrack the weight, right? Because now the weight sits a little bit down, a little bit lower at the resting position. So now you kind of have to do like a half squat or a quarter squat to actually get the weight up and start your set. But fortunately, this setup actually makes the arcing hack squat pattern feel 1,000 times better, 1,000 times more natural and smoother, because now the farthest part of that arc in the pattern is around the midpoint of the rep instead of at the top of the rep like it was when the attachment was situated higher up off the ground. As well, this setup also substantially reduces any risk of your rack coming off the ground, even if it's not bolted to the floor or heavily weighted down, since the attachment itself is much closer to the ground. I still recommend using some counterweight in this case to make sure that there's no tip risk, but lowering the attachment closer to the ground is probably a good idea. Now, the only real downside with this change in setup is that you can't store the attachment in the folded down position because, like I said earlier in the video, it's a pretty long attachment, right? It's got a lot of length to it. So if you set it up lower on the rack, it's actually going to hit the ground before it's able to fold all the way down. Personally, that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make because it makes the primary exercise that you're using this attachment for anyway feel 100 times better. It lets you work harder, get in better work on it, and it drastically improves the safety profile of the attachment as well. And to be very fair to RitFit, they mention this potential tip issue in their FAQ on the product description page, and they tell you to make sure that your rack is weighted down properly to ensure that there's no wobbling or that it doesn't tip over. I just felt that this point was important enough that I needed to make mention of it anyway. Before I give my final rating and close out the review, I do just want to briefly mention a couple points for improvement that I think will take RitFit's 2.0 version of this attachment to the next level. So improvement point number one is provide a little bit more margin with the attachment clips so that it's easier to secure the unit to the rack. As it is, it can be a little bit cumbersome getting the attachment situated in just the right way in order to be able to secure it to the rack because the margins are very small. The problem with this is you work out by yourself like me, you want to do multiple different things with it in a workout, but you actually have to adjust it to be able to do those different things. But now adjusting it up and down mid-workout to perform those different exercises can be a little bit of a pain because the margins are so small with getting the thing set up to where you can actually get it secured. So making that process a little bit less cumbersome will go a very, very, very long way. Now, improvement point number two, and this might just be a total pipe dream on my part, but I really, really hope that they can do it. If they can engineer some kind of dual function for the attachment that turns it into a proper pressing implement as well. So like I showed you guys overhead presses and push presses and chest presses in this video. But if they can turn this thing into a proper pressing implement too, a dual function implement, that would just be freaking amazing. That way you could do all those pressing movements that I showed here and all those setup issues would be gone. And finally, improvement point number three, I would also recommend that if possible, RitFit consider switching the design mechanism so that the attachment is made to secure to the front of the rack as opposed to the side of the rack. That's because most power racks, including their M1 rack, which is the rack primarily shown in this video, are much more stable from front to back as compared to laterally. So if the unit is attached to the front as opposed to the side, you'll get much less wobbling in general while you're working hard on it, and I think that would be an important improvement. Overall, though, all the exercises on this attachment feel really great. You can do a lot of different productive things with it, and you can get a lot of mileage out of it, even though it's supposed to actually just be a somewhat niche piece. So for a home gym owner, something like this can be a very valuable addition to your space because for a small investment and with a minimal footprint, now you get a hack squat machine, an overhead press machine, a Viking press, and even a chest press machine. These are all movements that are typically sorely lacking in a home gym environment. So gaining access to them with something like this can be really beneficial for a lot of lifters. RitFit is also telling me that they're already in the process of expanding production of this attachment so that it can also fit 2x3 and 3x3 racks as well, instead of just 2x2 racks like the attachment that I have here. So once those models become available soon, then this attachment will be compatible with pretty much any type of squat rack on the market. So be sure to be on the lookout for that as well. Anyway, I really like this thing and I plan to put in some big work on it. Overall, I give the RitFit AT02 Hack Squat Rack Attachment 4 out of 5 stars. I really like the attachment for what it is and what it allows you to do, as well as how all of the movements feel on it. I only docked it that 1 star really because of the tip risk that currently exists, but if they get that sorted out, I will happily rate a future model a perfect 5 out of 5 stars. So if you're interested in grabbing this cool hack squat attachment or any other piece of RitFit sports equipment for yourself, be sure to check out my links in the description down below and be sure to use code RFONKIRI for 12% off your purchase. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and I hope you found this review helpful. If you want to see more content like this where I review different pieces of home gym equipment, please be sure to smash the like button and leave me a friendly comment down below. Check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com for online coaching and training programs. And as always, keep training hard. I will catch you guys next time.